wait, let's do that one more time. It didn't record. Okay,
I get over too, right?
I'm Jeannie Ralston. I'm the co-founder and editor of NextTribe, which is a digital magazine and community for smart, engaged women over 45. Let's hear it for smart, engaged women over 45. Woo, 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 woo. And Bob, and any guys here, we love you too. It's just
and our male allies.
Yes, male allies. So we always like to promote and inform women in this age group, and we've been so lucky in many ways to have Ashton Applewhite speak at one of our events. We like to do events across the country where we're talking about all the possibilities of women in this age group. And she's also on our advisory board, and she's just a fabulous ally. We're all in the same mission. She's way out there in front of us, and we learn so much from her doing this. And as you guys probably know, she is the author of This Chair Rocks, such a great title, a manifesto against ageism. And she's known everywhere as an expert on discrimination based on age. And she also has a great TED Talk that you guys need to watch. I'll send it in the email I send after this, and you'll be able to see it if you haven't already. It's got a great standing ovation, and you'll see why when you see it. So I wanted to talk to, and we're happy that Ashton is feeling better after Sunday, and she looks great. And somebody wants me to spell the name of the magazine, which I will. NextTribe, NextTribe, nexttribe.com. Anyway, so we wanted to have Ashton here because, with all that's going on with the coronavirus, we hear so much about, it's affecting people over 60 and people in nursing homes. And there's just been a lot that I feel like people who are older are experiencing, not just the worry about the getting the disease, but also how people are reacting to older people. So I thought Ashton could talk about this, and the way she posed it was we should talk about what COVID-19 is teaching us about ageism. And Ashton, I really like you had a more positive spin. I was like, ageism is getting worse, or what is it? But you wanted a more positive spin. So I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to start off and talk about what are we learning about ageism from COVID-19?
Well, the media coverage of anything age related tends to be generally hand-wringing, and focus on all the bad things and older people as a burden and so on and so forth. And there's been some of that around COVID, saying COVID is making ageism worse. I don't think COVID is making ageism worse. I think it is exposing the ageism and the ableism and the racism and all this other stuff, but especially ageism, because people are less aware of it than ever before. And this gives us a historic opportunity to build on that awareness. And as an activist, even if you think I'm smoking crack and that it is making it worse, which, a lot of people agree, it's not just me who thinks that it's exposing it rather than making it worse. But even if you don't want to argue that point, let's talk about the opportunities here. In addition to the challenge, we know social change is hard, but so many more people are aware. A thought experiment that I put out early on was, imagine what the infection rate, the employment rate, the mortality rate, pick your index. Imagine what it would look like if we had known from the beginning that COVID was also going to attack healthy young people. It would look really different. And if and it's a grim, I hate to seem sort of ghoulish and like I'm profiting from mass deaths and something horrible. Thank you, Kathleen, for the sympathetic gestures, but it is an opportunity. It is waking, because people are like, ageism isn't as serious. It's not as real. It only affects old people. Our disregard for the health of young people in the face of the pandemic is itself an expression of ageism. Ageism is any judgment about a person or a group of people on the basis of how old we think they are. So, you know, I'm not a Pollyanna. But I do think, you know, it is opening people's eyes to it in an amazing way.
Yes. So, yeah, speak to that. When you first, it's almost like, especially now, but things are opening up again, and it's almost like, okay, we might be ready to sacrifice older people or something. I mean, it just sounds. I mean, it's just so hard to believe. So, what?
You know, I think it's really important. I mean, my partner, we're actually separated. We live in New York, but he got marooned in California in the lap of luxury at his son's really nice house in San Jose. But there was a video on Sunday of people in Central Park, and they did look hard to tell. They did look pretty distant, but there were a lot of them, and very few were wearing masks, and they were all young, and they were all white. And I think it's, you know, I'm the millionth person to say this, but COVID is exposing the vulnerabilities of all these different populations. He said, gee, I wonder when it will be safe to be in New York, because it makes me feel like these young people aren't worried about my well-being. That's true, I think, in some broad sense. I mean, obviously some of them do, they love their mothers, whatever. But they're also putting at risk everyone with a chronic condition, everyone with a disability, you know, depending on the type, but I will say that generally. And of course, all the people of color who are disproportionately working, who are doing the delivery work, the much of the healthcare, much of the sanitation stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just we older people who are being put at risk. It is all of these groups, and I think it's really important to ally with them. You know, you know, looking at your faces, we are almost all upper middle class white women. You are the backbone of this movement. I'm one of them. But if we want a movement that isn't made up entirely of people that look like us, we need to explicitly ally with these other groups and you know, think about how to frame, you know, express our solidarity with them and talk about how the vulnerability is shared and is the result of larger external systems.
Right. So,
I mean, that's why the generational, you know, pointing fingers at, you know, in the beginning, there was like, I can't get my parents to stay home, right? And then the parents going, you know, older people saying, those crazy kids partying are going to kill us. Stupid people come in all ages, right? It's not about age. It's almost never about age. It's about access. It's about vulnerability. It's about class. It's about intelligence. It's about politics. It's about ideology. Seldom about age.
well, and I think that, I'd like to see what kind of things you have seen from, I mean, you said it's exposed ageism, so it's exposed things that you've known, but what is the world seeing that might help our case, you know? And what?
Well, the most gruesome example, and whether it, you know, helps our case, but is to go to the darkest heart, you know, the mass deaths of older people with disabilities in nursing homes. Mm-hmm. I mean, that there, you know, I have talked for a long time about the need to address the intersection of ageism and ableism, which is prejudice against people with disabilities. People with disabilities don't want to go there because they're ageist, and as we all are, and because most of the activists in this space are young, and they're mostly young queer women of color, and they are intersectional up the wazoo. They are up for climate justice and indigenous people's rights, and, you know, all genders, all races. Age is not on their radar. COVID will help put it there. From the other perspective, even the most progressive people in old land resist the equation of aging and disability, and they are not the same. But if we are lucky, we will all age into some degree of physical disability. Cognitive decline is not inevitable, but to pretend there's no overlap, to pretend that older people never become disabled and people with disabilities never grow old, reinforces dual stigma, right? I may be old, at least I'm not crippled. You know, I may be crippled, at least I'm not old. So we stick to our silos. And I'm really hoping, and the COVID has brought some disability justice people into my, social network. There's a little bit of tangible example that this is happening. To how can we bridge this gap? And it's scary. No one wants to be that person with an extreme disability in a nursing home, and no one sure as shit wants to die alone in one.
Oh.
So that is the dark heart of it. But let's look at not only why those people were, and many of them are getting the best care they possibly can in really good facilities. There are a lot of really good people in the long-term care business who are distraught and doing the very best they can, but not just the older people who are dying, but the people who care for them, who once again are largely women, grossly underpaid, got no PPE, have to work several jobs, so they had to move from facility to facility. Why don't we care about them either? Because of structural forces.
Right. And Imelda has a comment. Imelda, I'm gonna unmute you. Wait. Oop. Can I unmute you, Imelda? There. Okay, Imelda.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. I want to say why I'm not on video.
Oh.
I haven't had a haircut in 3 months.
Oh, none of us have.
I know, but your hair is not like mine.
Okay.
But Imelda, I met you through the Pioneer Network, which is a progressive force in the nursing home sphere. So talk about how you see it from someone who's known a lot about nursing culture for a while, nursing home culture.
Well, it's very true. There are people working in nursing homes who care, who are devastated by what they see happening to the older adults. I was at a Zoom meeting just within the past week with colleagues in aging services, and there was an administrator who got a lot of support from the group because of the state she was in. And she said, it's so hard for me to see the physical isolation that the residents are enduring. And then beyond that, to see what it does to them mentally and then physically. She says, we're finding physical diagnoses that clearly are the result of isolation. And she was teary when she talked about that. It's a very complex issue, this whole thing about nursing
It's really complex. I mean, and part of it is just the cruel nature of a pandemic. I was on a Zoom today with a friend in her 80s in England, and she has devoted family, but they say, no, Mom, we cannot come see you. You cannot see your grandchildren. And it's hard on her, but I'm really glad they're doing it and she's doing it. So that is an intractable problem. The larger question that I focus on in an activist is, why didn't we invest more in protecting these people to start with, in keeping contagion out of these communities, and of course, once again, in a society that doesn't value older people, doesn't value the people who work with them.
Right.
So that's one reason, a huge reason, there wasn't PPE, and that so many, nursing homes struggle for funding. So the nursing home model has to change.
So, okay, talk about that, how this could change elder care.
I'm not an expert in that. I have a very interesting email about that from a Forbes article about it, which I would rather forward than take a guess at remembering what it said. I mean, what I want to see, I am working for change at the broadest possible level. We are not going to see people, we're not going to value the people in nursing homes. We're not going to value the people who care for them. We're not going to end discrimination in the workplace. We're not going to improve the position of older women who want to stay employed, who want equal pay, et cetera, without changing the way we look at ageism itself in the culture. That's why we need a grassroots movement like the women's movement. Imagine if we were talking about the role of women in the world as opposed to the role, for the sake of argument, of old people, since it's mostly discrimination against olders. Right. Think where we would be without the women's movement, right? And consciousness raising helped women see that the problems they were encountering, the barriers, were not personal problems, but were the result of structural forces, sexism, harassment, patriarchy, and that we could come together and do something about it. And that's what we need to do around ageism in order. So, I'm focused on sort of those larger scale structural issues, but there are really good people working in the nursing home.
So do you think that this is what's going to come out of this is some kind of movement? I mean, like a bigger movement against ageism. Obviously, you've started it and been working on it.
Well, I do, and I see evidence of it all around, but some concrete evidence of it is that with two colleagues, I started a site called Old School. The website is oldschool.info, and I'm sure Jeannie will send it to people. It's a clearinghouse of free, vetted anti-ageism resources. And soon after we started it, we had to start a campaign section, which is global anti-ageism campaigns, not pro-aging, not how to be healthy, not how to not get, laid off, anti-ageism campaigns from all around the world, including the Australian one that brought me over there in November. So there's a terrific one in San Francisco. They're cropping up all over because of the World Health Organization's Age-Friendly Cities initiative. So that is tangible evidence that a movement is underway, and there's all kinds of resources on that site. Everything is free except the books, videos, workshops, and we're updating it. We're going to launch, we're in the middle of a last whack of a website software upgrade, and then we're going to launch a whole COVID section.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm putting that up there, and I will send it with the email when we finish here. But I don't know, I guess in the last day I have felt things have gotten worse for me, just because it feels like, okay, we're just gonna, as I said before, we're just gonna open and there's gonna be fallout, but we're just gonna open and think about it. Like, okay, we're gonna be writing some of these people off.
Jeannie, some people really need haircuts, okay? That's a cheap shot at you, Imelda, when before you all were on. I'm like, okay, no haircut since January. How am I doing? So I do think about the haircut thing, but those are, I mean, I think it's insane to be opening up the country. But especially because some, neo-Nazis need tattoos. I don't get it. But obviously, these are not issues related to age. They speak to the absence of I see a Canadian on the call, on the two Canadians, actually, Canadians, older Canadians see the effect of a lifetime of access to free national health care. I really hope that at least two things that come out of this are universal health care and a labor movement. But again, I'm out of my depth here. Okay. I'm worried. I mean, I tell my friends overseas, I say it's like sitting on the Titanic. But I do think that the way that the intersectional nature of all these vulnerabilities, race in particular, in terms of COVID as a whole, are being exposed is really waking people up. And that does, people are really thinking big in a way that I see as the big opportunity here at a terrible and hugely preventable human cost.
Well, Laurel Bayer has a point along those lines. Laurel, you're unmuted now.
Oh, I saw this article the other day that it was someone who advocated for the disabled and was talking about the fact that we're all disabled right now,
That's a good point.
And it points out, first of all, that it might get people to have some sense of empathy, to upgrade our empathy. And also that most of the reasons why that is occurring is not because, people who are hearing impaired didn't listen harder. It's because we didn't create this, as you say, the structural stuff. That she pointed out that, if everybody were taught American Sign Language when they were a child, then people with hearing disabilities wouldn't be disabled. Yeah. It's structural and it's community based. It's not this old American bootstraps thing.
Right, right. Exactly. I mean, it's the principle of universal design, that if we make things that work for people with disabilities, they benefit all of us. And if they become universal, then they lose their stigma and their association with disability. The famous example is the curb cut effect, that because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, curb cuts everywhere were federally mandated and they became the norm. And guess what? They weren't only used by people with wheelchairs, they were used by delivery people and skateboarders and people pushing, strollers.
Yeah.
So, and no one says, oh, why am I doing this, annoying thing, expensive thing for expensive old people or expensive people with disabilities? The things that make a community good to grow old in are the same things: public services, a social safety net, healthcare. I mean, at least when you're 65, you age into Medicare, which is a plus. Parks, green spaces, public transportation, those are the same things that make it good for everybody.
Yeah, I always make this a comparison that if there are cracks in the sidewalk, everybody falls down, not just old people.
Yeah. And Ardell Ardell, are you calling from Canada?
No, I live in New York.
Oh, okay, because you had a point. Do you want to discuss your point?
Well, I mean, I just think generally speaking that what the pandemic is exposing, and it exposes it even more so, I think, for olders, but is just the horrible unpreparedness that as a country we had because of the profit motive in healthcare. And I think this would be really different if we had a nationalized system of healthcare, or one system only for healthcare, which would not maybe allow so many people to fall through the cracks.
Right.
I couldn't agree more. But in both England and Italy Italy has national healthcare, and Milan had one of the best healthcare systems in Italy. Those systems have to be publicly supported and funded. And we see, Thatcher did what Reagan did, stripped it of support. So we also have to be committed to, government-wide support of those systems.
Okay. Christina Kennedy, you had a question. I mean, you made a point about it being ageist, that people over 65 are expected to shelter in place. And is that in and of itself ageist, I guess? Or do you want to ask your question? Sorry, Christine.
That's okay. So I was just, by definition, physicians, if you're over 65, you're officially elderly. So, it's just another example of within the traditional medical community, that it's chronological age is not necessarily the best indicator of someone's overall ability, disability, vulnerability, any of that stuff. But in the official guidelines, they're using the age 65 consistently. So it's like it's built-in ageism. And as they have all these stages of opening, they're talking about really people who are 65 and older should be aging in place until forever. Not aging in place, sheltering in their own homes.
Yeah, no, I know what you meant. Any age category is sort of the definition, of course, as you surmise, of ageism. If I could put one fact, like magically zip it into the head of everyone in the world, the one fact that would do, I think, the most to end ageism, because all prejudice is based on stereotypes, is the fact that the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. The older a person is, the less their chronological age says about what they're capable of physically, cognitively, socially, whatever. There was a tremendous amount when things were really bad in Italy. I think they were actually forced to triage medical resources by age. And I will say, I got on this huge high horse about how this is ageism of a lethal variety, which is, and this has to stop, which it does. But 2 points on that. when you are in a crisis situation, which I know from, reading about the pandemic, on a battlefield, in effect, you have to make decisions fast. The right decision an hour later is not the right decision anymore. You cannot afford to weigh a bunch of options, and it is really takes time to weigh underlying health conditions, which is the basis on which those decisions should be made, and age is fast. And those doctors they didn't want to kill the old people.
Oh, yeah.
Horrible and
No, no, no,
traumatic
yeah.
for them. So, the point again is the larger social factors. If we had a government that cared about the most vulnerable, if we hadn't closed all the public hospitals, if we hadn't privatized medicine, largely as Ardell references, and on out, then we would have had, if we had an operating federal government, we would have had enough ventilators and enough PPE, and those choices wouldn't have had to be made. So I think it's, that's the awful thing. Another thing that would really help is if they put a silver stake through the heart of the word elderly. No, a lot of older people, I think, actually probably took risks with their health because they're like, I'm not elderly, goddammit, I'm going to go to the supermarket, or, whatever. I readily identify as old and older. I don't identify as elderly. That said, I'm 67. I am at higher risk. And I think it's important not to let our internalized ageism, our very human reluctance to say, geez, I was just laughing at myself with the friends I was Skyping with in England this afternoon about how I'm like taking all precautions because my daughter-in-law, who lives behind me, she's vulnerable. And she's recovering from surgery, but that's sort of to save face, when in fact, of course, I'm also doing it for me, but it's easier to say I'm doing it for her. Whatever works, right? But obviously those rules should be according to age, and I see the age of the point at which sheltering in place is recommended going anywhere from 60 to 65, hovering around 70, and my partner's 74, so that's sort of in my mind, and even all the way up to 75. Of course, it's a sliding scale, and I hope once again this is a case where age really doesn't belong in the equation at all. It's, do you have underlying health conditions? And and it certainly, the older you are, if you are into your 80s and 90s, you should probably be super careful.
And we have I'm trying to get Doreen. I'm going to have you, because you wrote in a question. You're in Canada, right?
Yeah, Victoria, BC. Yeah.
And you wrote a question before, and you wrote it again. So tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, first of all, I'm very happy to see you, Ashton. I've read about you a lot, and I've contacted you before about trying to start an anti-aging movement here in Canada. And when you mentioned about you looking over the audience of all these upper class, middle class women, I'm thinking, that's not me.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Because I'm actually on a low income. And when you talk about intersectionality of different stereotyped demographics, being on a low income is another one. And I find that, I'm kind of facing a double whammy of ageism and being a low income senior is kind of a double whammy. But it's hard to be positive in Canada right now about ageism, because it seems as though it's just it's not getting worse. I agree with you there, but it certainly has brought it out in this country how terrible and how poisonous it is. And our very own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, got up 2 weeks ago. He got in front of a mic in a press conference, actually saying that he had chosen to give financial assistance to other groups before low-income seniors. To me, that's admitting discrimination towards low-income seniors publicly, and I think that's scary. And I think that in this country, ageism comes from the very highest office down. And one of my question that I sent in to you before this event was that I know on Facebook you were recommending that people, go to different human rights organizations or different government authorities if they want to report an ageist being a victim of ageism, right? But what do you do when you're someone like me in Canada, where the highest office in the land is the one who's actually, I think, perpetuating ageism in this country? Where do you go when it's your prime minister? So really.
I
So
remember, yeah, that was an appeal from the Department of Health and Human Services, which does indeed not do you any good. I mean, I would say that, the real culprit here is capitalism, is a system that views its least productive members. And don't get me started on the notion that older people are not productive, not just in conventional economic terms, but in all sorts of countless harder to measure ways. And they do see us as disposable. And I would add to that, obviously, the young Latino and Black people in, certainly in the US, I mean, I have most familiarity with statistics here, who are dying in hugely disproportionate numbers. And the call to open it up or to not listen to your issues, as it's disgusting. It's ethically wrong. I mean, it's, you judge a society by how it treats its most vulnerable members, and a hyper-capitalist society does not value those of us at the margins. I mean, and if we want to make a pyramid or a food chain, disgusting idea, people who don't have homes at all to shelter into, people who are incarcerated. I mean, they are going to die in hideous numbers. So you have a lot of company, and that is not much comfort. I'm so sorry about your situation.
thank you. I mean, even country. Oh, sorry.
No.
Can I ask something back, or am I finished here? Or?
Well, just a short, and then
Sure, yeah. Like even down the States, I noticed that they're actually giving financial relief to seniors on Social Security. They're giving them some money. No? Oh, that's what I read. Is it wrong? Oh, okay. But like up here in Canada, they've given financial assistance to every single possible group except low-income seniors. And it's pretty hard to be in that group who's being so totally overlooked.
So sorry.
Yes, so sorry. This is heartbreaking. We have Beth Dawson has a comment. I'm going to unmute you, Beth, from down under. Wait, now why does it unmute? Can you unmute yourself? There, thank you.
Oh, hi. Look, I suppose for me, I actually work in aged care and have done for 25 years or more. And I work with organisations at this point in time across the regional area. So there's about 42 organisations. And I think when we went into lockdown in Australia, one of the things that our organisation started to do, of course, was, try and identify, programs closed specifically in aged care, people no longer were able to attend programs and things like that and receive service. And so, of course, they looked for alternative ways. And one of those things that they did was take up technology. So there may have been use of, like phone calls and things like that, but also, computers and Zooming and having online programs as much as possible, which was a really positive thing to have actually achieved. And I think, and I've received really great feedback about how that has actually worked for some people. But of course, given that I attended a lecture last week through Charles Sturt University in Australia, and one of the things that they identified was that technology has been useful, but of course it's not available to everybody. And so, Ashton, when you spoke earlier and you talked about whether it be that people be, whether it be due to homelessness, whether it be about economical status or even just down to the skills and knowledge of actually being able to use it, there was actually quite a large percentage of people, and it was around 60 to 70%. And so you sort of think it's that really hard thing of sort of
60% who that what?
Of over 67% they said in the presentation that it was 60 to 70% of people over 65. But I'm sorry, I can't give you as to, I'm not 100% sure if they've done that on a statewide or nationally. So, yeah. But of course, I suppose I look at that and I think, okay, so it's that thing that we sort of tend to go, okay, again, that that population that can access, that occurs and that support is provided. How do we make sure that we're still looking and thinking of those, where are those other gaps to connect with people that don't have that?
Yes, great question. Great question.
So do you have any thoughts on that? I guess, Ashton?
I think just to be aware, again, to think of how it's not just age and, it's also gender. Women we earn less, we live longer, we are less likely to have pensions. If we have pensions, they're smaller, and we suffer from more health conditions. So all these conditions are the reason that the poorest of the poor everywhere in the world are not just old, they are women, and not just women, but women of color. So again, all these things intersect. So just to keep that in mind. I mean, I was on a call yesterday with a group that wants to work with a designer to, which was, I'm interested in products they said products for people with disabilities and older people. And I said, well, what's the difference between the two? You're really talking about everyone, the older people you're talking to are those who, need something. And why don't you frame it around not how old are you, but what's hard for you? What's your need? And, because we all need help with something. And, but one question is, of course, how there was a designer there with a lot of experience from IDEO, which is a super fancy design firm, Bay Area. But most of the stuff she designed was designed to be sold business to business, right to nursing homes or to hospitals. How do you make stuff that is affordable, and how do you let people know about it? So these are, big supply chain problems, but they are solvable. I mean, the walkers are, I don't understand. I don't have to use one yet. I'm sure I'll come to it. What I need, I have really bad arthritis in both my shoulders now, and I have trouble taking my shirt off. I've started taking my shirt off like a boy. And the partner the person who got the company into this, they bought her little company. Her husband developed Parkinson's in his 40s, was having trouble buttoning his shirts, and she developed a system of magnetic closures for his clothes. Right. So, but what are those products that you might need when you're 40, you might need when you're 4, but that most of us are going to need some version of, and let's have it about the things we need rather than how old we happen to be, because once again, age is really not the vector.
Is that it's just a lazy way of thinking, do you think? I mean, just like
I think it is lazy. I think it's unexamined, and I think it's really damaging because it equates aging and disability, which we don't want to do. And also I could have, I've never been a runner. I've never been athletic. If I couldn't jog around the block, I wouldn't notice or care. Someone else who's never worn anything but sweatshirts, it might kill her that she couldn't jog around the block, but she wouldn't give a damn if she couldn't get, button a shirt. I mean, we all adapt. I mean, it's a problem with the sort of successful aging dogma, that you can have, if you just eat enough kale, do enough yoga, whatever it is, you can fend this off forever. And the fact is you can't. And so it sets us up to fail. It's expensive. Once again, class, and not everyone can afford, yoga and leisure and physical therapy and all those things. And it's gonna come, something is gonna, some part, there's only 2 inevitable bad things about getting older. Only 2. But they are unavoidable. People you've known all your life are going to die, and some part of your body is going to fall apart, and it sucks. And I do not, and there's, these are, and, financial woes, those issues are real, but our fears are way out of proportion to the reality. And the fact is, people continue to live well, not by avoiding impairment and disability, but by learning to live with it and learning to adapt, which we all do. I love pointing out to, 40-year-olds, you already can't do XYZ as fast as you used to, or as good as you used to. And either you didn't notice, or, it hasn't kept you from doing some version of it that you're just fine with.
That's a great point, isn't it? And we have Anne Randall. I love your point. Yes, you had a great comment. I'm unmuting. There you are.
Yeah, I put it in the comment that it was interesting because I work part of the year in Alaska, and then I live in the Northwest. I live on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, and where being an elder is a respected term. It's a revered term because they carry the culture and they carry the history. And so as the shutdowns began in both states, and I was in both states as they began, the remote villages shut down and wouldn't let outsiders in at all because they were trying to protect their elders, and because they have a long-term memory of the last time there was a pandemic, their elders died first, and that they lost a lot of valuable culture and a lot of valuable history. But their rationale
the native groups, right?
Yes, Alaska Native groups, and in where I am in Washington, the kind of remote tribes that live out on the coast have blockaded the villages. You can't even drive in unless you're of the village. And that even included in Alaska. I work with the teachers union up there, and the whole thing sort of broke out after spring break, and teachers who are white, and not a lot of Alaskan teachers are not from Alaska, they go up there to work. They went to home during spring break and they came back, and even they were not allowed in the villages. They were forced to quarantine for 2 additional weeks because it was all about protecting the elders. And I was really struck by the difference between that and the world that I live in, the white world that I live in, that we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's a great story. I happened to talk to my godson today, he's a junior in high school, and he was going to go work for the second summer on an Indian reservation, and that is another population. I don't know, I'm embarrassed to say, I believe it's Navajos that have been decimated, like other,
yes, New Mexico.
but they were not accepting any people into his program this year. So I hopefully they too were able to lock themselves off before, and hopefully the government is making sure that they get food and medical services. Wouldn't that be good?
Yes, and yes, it's a tragedy, just unfolding slow motion out there. I'm looking for Bob Colson. You have a good question, a couple of them, but where are you? Wait, can you raise your hand, Bob? Where did you go? Bob? Okay, maybe he had to get off. Anyway, I think he's not there.
He asked a question about the overarching causes of ageism: fear of death and fear of disability and dependence, and avoiding and rejecting older people are coping mechanisms. I don't buy it, because, and I wrote a long post about this. You should know that my website is thischairrocks.com. And if you just click on blog or /blog, I've been writing and thinking aloud about all this for almost 15 years now. Aging begins the minute we're born. Dying is what happens at the end of all that living. There are cultures like the one, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but that you just referred to in Alaska, that where older people are valued and revered and respected. Which is not to say that, so I do think that fear of dying is human. It's what gives us religions and Bach. But I do not think that our terror of aging is rooted in that. I think they're separate. I think it is fed us by a culture that wants us to be segregated by age, that wants us to be ashamed of aging so that they can sell us stuff to stop it or cure it, rather than seeing it for what it is, which is a natural, beautiful, powerful process that we embark on the day we're born. So I don't think ageism, like all prejudice, is socially constructed. We make it up. Like we make up racism and we make up, homophobia, and we can unmake it.
Yes, yay. And Sandra Stackler had a question. There you are, Sandra. Do you want to ask it related to that?
Hi, Ashton.
Hey,
I've been
Sandra.
following you for a while. I am a certified senior advisor, and I'm active in the community in Southern California. And my question to you is this: what do you think we should be doing right now to start this consciousness raising in our society?
I love that question.
What do we do?
I love that question, and I love that you use the word consciousness raising. I'm making a note of post to make sure that that I add to the email that Jeannie sends to you. One of which is things you can do if you want to help end ageism. The most powerful thing you can do is to stop and look at your own attitudes towards age and aging, because we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. We're all biased. Most of us haven't thought about ageism. And so that is an uncomfortable moment of reckoning. Once you see your own bias, you start to see it in the world around you, and that is really liberating. And that is the process that consciousness raising does on a mass basis. That is why it is the tool that catalyzed the women's movement. So on my website, because I wrote it, there are a couple of resources there, but also on Old School, which has a whole lot of other anti-ageism resources. There is a free downloadable pamphlet called Who Me, Ageist? How to Start a Consciousness Raising Guide Around Age Bias. I am itching for a smart feminist or 2 or 10 to adapt it into a consciousness raising guide around ageism and sexism for women, because we women are going to lead this movement. We have the most at stake. We are already leading it. And so, I mean, I've just been writing about this today. The women's movement, the second wave women's movement, was not only racist. The reason we have the term intersectionality is because those feminists who did fantastic work did not address the issues of women of color. They didn't address the issues of older women either. I read this great line, if I can only remember it, by Cynthia Rich, who with Barbara McDonald, who with her partner Cynthia Rich wrote a fabulous book called Look Me in the Eye, Old Woman, which is also on Old School, which was the first book about the intersection of ageism and sexism. And in 1985, she gave this talk to the National Association of Women's Studies. And she said, you, as an older woman, she said, you younger feminists, treat us the way men treat us. As though we age into invisibility. And she said, you come and, you ask us for our stories, we tell you, and at the end you say, you're a little embarrassed, and you say you think of us as your aunt, your mother, your grandmother. We are not your mothers, we are not your aunts, we are not your grandmothers. Those are roles put on us by patriarchy, and until we get rid of that, we're not going to get anywhere. Now, I'm not quoting her anymore. So, I mean, like, that blew the top of my head off. We need an intersectional lens to look at ageism and sexism. So please do download that guide and start with that, because it provides the framework for what consciousness raising in and how to go at it. And I urge each of you, to start a group if you have the energy, and to make it of women of all ages, because one of the way to counteract, there's no substitute for friends you've known your whole life, but making younger friends is a wonderful thing, not just for the obvious reason that you're planning new things in case the old stuff dies, but that is a wonderful way to stay involved in and to learn from the way they're leading their lives. And if more younger women were friends with older women who love being older women, they would be more generous to us, we would be more generous to them, and we would again join forces. And I do think there's been so many interesting books out this spring and fall. Mary Pfeiffer's Women Rowing North. There's a terrific new book called In Our Prime that talks about younger and older feminists she talks about the double helix of ageism and sexism. And she talks about younger and older feminists coming together to complete the unfinished business of the women's movement. And if you think I'm jazzed about ageism, when those two get together, I like start to, vibrate, because I think it's really powerful. So thank you for that great question and that chance to go on that mini little tirade.
Okay, yay, thank you. And we have a couple more questions. I just want to say that for NextTribe, what I tell younger people is, I say, if you're lucky, you'll one day get to join NextTribe. We say we start about 45, and they look at me, and I'm like, think about it. That means that you will have made it to this age. And I also tell them, we're showing you that it's not anything to be scared of, to be over.
Right. One of the campaigns on Old School is the city of Toronto has this anti-ageism campaign, and they have this little genius. They have a little video about it on a poster of aging cream. And they did this thing, they set up a table and were saying to people, would you like some aging cream? And it makes you look older. And people are like, why would I want that? And so, well, it conveys experience. It erases the telltale signs of, inexperience and whatever. And it's hilarious the way they just get people to go, gee, it's really, it's political theater in effect. But it's like, yeah, if you're lucky, you get to grow old and be, if you're lucky and privileged, you get to be in the world in a much more comfortable and powerful way for many of us.
Yes, good. So I wanted to, Mary Kay, there's Mary Kay Fleming, who's one of our writers, and she's hilarious. Now I put pressure on you. You don't have to be hilarious right now, but her writing is really hilarious. So you had we're kind of getting away from what the COVID itself, but just in a bigger sense, you had a question I like.
Yeah, and my question was about, and I encounter this all the time in my writing, because some of what I write is about, the challenges of getting older. And when you I struggle with the line between making fun of the little foibles of growing older, like I can't hear as well as I used to, wear my reading glasses, I'll wet my pants if I laugh too hard, all that kind of stuff.
Been there.
Which I think are, yeah.
They're funny.
I think those are legitimate targets, and I think they are evidence of using humor as a coping mechanism for encountering the challenges of aging. But I struggle with the balance between that and feeding ageist stereotypes.
It's complicated. I mean, I also have a blog called Yo, Is This Ageist? Where you can submit, things you've seen or heard or perhaps done or said and wonder if they're ageist. And, that is something that I encounter. Everything in life is funny. What happens to your body is funny. It has a comic aspect to it. I think the dividing line is that discrimination is not funny. Those really disgusting birthday cards are not funny. So I think the best sort of all-purpose rejoinder, when no one wants to be the spoiler, when everyone's like laughing, ha ha ha, you have no sense of humor, which is a classic way to just deflect discomfort, by the way, is just to say, well, would you ever make fun of someone on the basis of the color of their skin, on the basis of who they slept with? Maybe farts are funny, but or wetting your pants, but discrimination is never funny. And that's a pretty good litmus test. If the same behavior or attitude wouldn't pass muster if it had to do with race or gender, it's not okay. Mm-hmm. But we each have to do this in our own way and in our own time. And some of this stuff is funny, and you trust your inner your inner compass.
Yeah.
And your editor.
Yeah. Oh, I do. I definitely do. And I definitely have drawn some lines. I mean, for one thing, I would never, ever write anything thinking that it was mean-spirited. Secondly, of any kinds of the changes of aging that anybody could possibly encounter, I will never target mental health, and I will never target cognitive decline. But I poke fun at my own expense that my knees creak and that I can't do some of the things that I used to do and those kinds of things. And I think that's okay. I have poked fun at my not being as tech savvy as people who are younger. But again, I don't want that to feed a stereotype that people beyond a certain age cannot deal with technology, because that's not.
Add an example about your friend Lucy, who's a whiz at it. Whatever it happens to be, or an example of someone defying a stereotype in the same way.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I have to say there are two comments about the TV show Mrs. America, and I just have to brag about one of the things I'm proudest of in my life. I write really slowly, and I only write a book every 22 years, I think. And my previous book was published in 1993, and it was called Cutting Loose: Why Women Who End Their Marriages Do So Well. And it was catalyzed by a very similar realization to this project about ageism. I decided I couldn't stay married. I started researching the lives of women after divorce, and found out the thing I found out that immediately was that 2/3 of divorces were initiated by women. It's been that way forever. And I was astonished. I thought it was 97% guys, ditching their sad, pathetic wives who never had a happy moment again. And of course, the reality is very different from the picture that's portrayed of the grim life of women after divorce, just like the reality of life after 45 is very different from the way it's portrayed because of patriarchy, because of sexism, because of ageism. And Phyllis Schlafly, the subject of Mrs. America, put my book on her Eagle Forum's enemies list.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay, now I can die and go to heaven. I have pissed off Schlafly.
Yes, very good. That's a good enemy to have. Very proud moment. We also we're running out of time, but I do want to call on Rhonda Whitworth. You had a interesting comment and question.
It was actually Ruth's question.
Oh,
so
Ruth, okay.
Ruth. Well, what I've noticed is, particularly talking to younger people, and especially during this last election cycle, that the millennials are very, very disillusioned with what we have done to this planet, and how we have allowed this to really unfold during our generation. And my question is really, how do we start to bridge that gap? Because they have a point. We have been part of this, even though there was an ingrained patriarchy. We've still been part of it. And I just want to know your thoughts on how we can begin to bridge that gap.
Sure. Every generation blames the one who came before. It is the way of humans. Every generation says, in my day, kids didn't do that crap. And of course, kids did. But this is the idea of a generation gap is likewise a political and social invention. It was actually created in its modern manifestation by some conservative individuals and think tanks in the 70s as a way to pit the generations against each other. That's what all prejudice does. I'm sure that some of you here were marching in the climate crisis and marching for, all sorts of progressive things that we didn't succeed in changing, just like white supremacy is a youth movement. So I think the bigger question is, again, to zoom out, look at the structural issues. Pointing fingers at other generations does exactly what the reactionary forces want us to do: argue about, in Me Too, well, was it the boys, was it French feminists who got it wrong, or American feminists who got it wrong? The problem is not French feminists or American feminists. The problem is patriarchy. The problem is climate change. The problem is greed. The problem is capitalism. And so what I urge you to do is find the like-minded people, whatever your politics happen to be, find a mixed age group that supports something that you would like to see happen, and join it and work with younger people to make that thing happen.
Excellent. Yes. So we are running out of time. I wanted to just say that I've seen that kind of thing come up about, you know, people, not, millennials supposedly not liking the baby boomers. But I think a point is that baby boomers are responsible for lots of, we were there for civil rights and for the women's movement. So I think a balanced look is that, okay, we didn't get everything right, but every generation has their contribution. And I think.
And our failings, you know, but it's about, again, take age out of it. It's about ideology and privilege, not age.
Yes, that's a wonderful point. I'm going to unmute everyone, and I know people are going to have to leave, but I just wanted, so we can have in unison share our praises for sweet, wonderful, I won't say sweet. I mean,
thank you.
You might not be sweet.
Definitely not sweet.
Let's see. I think everybody's unmuted now. You should be. So we want to just say thank you to Ashton for her time. And I will be, as I said, I will be downloading this video and sending you the link. I'm also going to write a story for NextTribe based on this conversation, so you can look for that as well. And please look for your support for NextTribe. We're trying to do all that Ashton's kind of our, she's a role model mentor, and we wish we could, everything we do could be in line with what she believes. So we're trying. But well, we're trying, yes. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeannie.
Thank you.
And
Bye, everyone. Keep in touch.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.